Yeah, welcome everybody. Joel, go ahead and call us to order.
Yes, I call this meeting to order at 11:05 a.m. We'll go ahead and conduct roll call. Panel member Tilly. Panel member Pintrance.
Present.
Panel member Urquhart, absent. Panel member Chrislock. Panel member Melton. Panel member Linder. Panel member Kerr, absent. Panel member Schiavone.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. Well, so welcome all of you to our chilly conference room. Last time we met was I think very early January. Is that what those minutes are? Yeah, January 31st. So we're looking for actually I jumped comments from the public. Are there any members of the public? Just Director Edwards?
Director Edwards.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So we're looking for a motion to adopt the meeting minutes of the January 31st, 2023 meeting. Anybody with a second? And roll call.
I'd like to comment on the minutes if I could, please. Yep. Item number 4. Joel's accountability there. Item number 4 was the update on the Minor Peninsula Taxpayers Association lawsuit. And the second paragraph, we have the question by Melody Chrislock regarding the MPTA lawsuit. We all recall that before that, at 1 hour and 5 minutes of the meeting, Mayor Kerr suggested that there was a conflict of interest on the board, and that was my being on the panel. And, you know, it's there in the record. And then Dave Laredo read the definition of a conflict of interest, and I have it here on my phone, but we all know it's all there at 1 minute and 1 hour and 5 minutes on the recording. The definition that was given was that a conflict of interest and bias. Does the individual have a personal economic interest in this that is different than the public at large? And is there a bias? I'm going to suggest that Melody Chrislock, having received payments from the district to do public relations work, she and her husband do have that exact economic interest and do have a bias. And I would therefore say this is a conflict of interest as defined. Mr. Laredo so aptly applies to Melody that it'd be appropriate for her to resign from this panel.
To the minutes?
Yeah, this would be a separate item. This is not on the minutes, but it could be raised at the time that there's a discussion on any matter.
Right. And I would like for the minutes then to reflect that conversation that occurred at the last meeting at 1 hour and 5 minutes, to include that verbiage around conflict of interest. And then also, if we take action in this meeting on my request for the resignation, that's great. If we don't, Melody, I would suggest you resign. And if there is no action taken, I certainly would like the minutes of this meeting to reflect this conversation as well. Thank you.
So Joel, we can go back on the tape
Yes.
and find the comments he's referring to. And
Right.
I can play them. I've got them right here.
no, because he's going to need to transcribe, but
Right.
I think we can accept a second with that amendment to the minutes, just to highlight that conversation did take place. So anybody with a
feel
second?
comfortable if we just table it to this meeting.
You want to do that?
Yeah, table.
Because not sure how lengthy it is.
Yeah.
Bring back a revised set of minutes.
Okay. Good with that. Everybody good with that? All right.
Thank you.
That brings us to discussion item. Discussion item number 2. These are the standard tables and charts, but updated through as current as we can be. Suresh?
Thank you, Dave. Good morning, panel members. So you have 3 exhibits. Exhibit 2A, 2B, and 2C. Exhibit 2A is very simple. It's the water supply charge receipts shown all the way to February of 2023. It's the middle column we're looking at. The budget was 22-23 budget was $3.4 million. So far, we've collected about 60% of the revenue. That's a little over $2 million. $2,022,000, and that's fairly normal. The April receipts, the December receipts is about 60%, and then we get about 30%, 35% in December. So that's the next collection that once the first collection comes in December, second collection comes in April. So the April will have about 30% of the collections. And so June will have a very small amount, which will bring us to about $3.4 million. And by the way, we will talk more about the water supply charge with the NPTA lawsuit. So I won't dive into that discussion in terms of why we're booking the entire water supply charge. The next
we'll get to that.
The next exhibit 2B is the one where both highlighted columns have been updated. The one on the right-hand side, which says fiscal year 21-22 audited actuals. Our audit did make to the board in February. It has been finalized. And so the very last column, far right-hand column grade, that has been updated. Those numbers are all audited numbers now. We are also reporting through February 28, 23. That's for the fiscal year 22-23. That's the middle gray column. And so you'll see we started the year with the beginning fund balance, and then we have the water supply charge, the revenue, the collection of the capacity fee, the water sales, PWM water sales. All of those revenues totaled $14.986 million. And then on the expense side, you have the direct personnel, the direct supplies and services, the project expenses for reimbursements and non-reimbursements, and those project expenses are broken out, which is delivered at the bottom of that page where you'll see project expenses, and all those project expenses are detailed out. The big ticket item there is on the revenue side was the sales of the PWM, and then you'll see on the expenses side is the purchase of the water itself. And then we have other expense items there, the fixed asset contingencies, debt service, and then indirect labor, indirect supplies and services. It's all in all, the expenses through February 28th was $12.2 million, generating a surplus at this point, but that surplus will definitely get used up if all of the expenses materialize. And Exhibit 2C is
Just before we leave to Exhibit 2C, Suresh, on Exhibit 2B, to date, the water sales have pretty much been offset by water revenues. So you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, not 6 down. Oh, I'm sorry. The water supply charge itself, but then the third one down, PWM water sales. So we generally receive water from Monterey One Water. We pay for it. We bill Cal-Am for our deliveries. We get paid. So there's about a 60 to 75 day gap in there between receipt of revenue from Cal-Am and payment. So sometimes we're ahead and waiting for revenue to be received. But we're about to enter a period where at the end of this month, we expect all of Cal-Am's company water, the 3,500 acre foot commitment, will have been met. And so then in May and June, we will be adding to the operating reserve, which Cal-Am doesn't pay for. So we'll be using district revenues, and you won't see an offsetting water sales revenue. We'll just be paying for that primarily through the water supply charge. So we've got to add about another 500 acre feet to the operating reserve. And the reason for the operating reserve, just a little bit of memory, when the regional desal plant was first approved and Marina Coast Water District was the partner that was going to run the desal plant, they had an agreement with Cal-Am that Cal-Am would pay for 100% of the debt service, whether water was delivered or not. It's called a take or pay contract. When we got to Pure Water Monterey, Cal-Am wasn't interested in a take or pay contract. They said, if you deliver the water, we'll pay for the water up to 3,500 acre feet. And we said, well, there's a risk of an outage. And they said, we're not giving you that contract where we're paying for that, whether you deliver or not. You have to deliver. So the way to protect yourself would be to build an operating reserve. So that operating reserve is water that's available should the plant go down for a period of time. And at the end of the day, it'll be about a 6-month supply. So you could, withstand a 6-month outage. Because we're now in the 3rd year of deliveries, we're trying to build that up to the full 1,750 acre feet. We're about 500 acre feet short. So that's what'll happen in May and June. And I don't know, Suresh, what will that cost us? That's
Yeah, that'll be about a little over $1.6 million.
so 1.6 million. So we're going to end up spending from our bank account the 1.6 million just to build up the operating reserve. So it's something that's just looming out there in the next couple of months, which you won't see here right now. To date, everything's just kind of been offset. Revenue from CalAm covers the expenditure.
We do have a budget line for that, Dave. If you see in the project expenses broken out, it'll say PWM project operating reserve.
Yep.
We had
Okay.
anticipated buying reserve at $1.2 million. You'll see the actual is zero. But that's the line that Dave was talking about.
Yeah, he's pointing it down in the project expenditures. It's the 3rd line down. So to date, it's been 0. That'll start working its way up to $1 million, $1.5 million. Okay, Suresh, you can go to, yeah,
Yeah.
1750. Yeah.
So Exhibit 2C is the same.
Hang on, another question here.
Also on 2B, the user fee is given as $700,000 to $800,000 in the 2 years. That seems to be a portion of the user fee. What was the gross user fee during those periods?
Yeah, this is just the portion that goes into the water supply area.
Right.
Yeah, the total user fee, about 4.8.
Yeah, close to $5 million.
Yeah.
Right. And then how was this amount determined as a portion of that overall?
Well, so, the user fee was originally intended to cover the environmental mitigation program and the conservation program that went off of the bill at the same time the user fee was put back on. So we budget those, take them out of the user fee, and then we see how much is remaining. But to date, we've balanced this account with property taxes and user fees. So we, in effect, look at the water supply charge and all of the expenses, and any shortfall we then backfill with user fee and property taxes. So if you look at in that very first column, the budget includes about $1.1 million in property taxes and the 792. So those were just how short this fund was when you applied the water supply charge first. And
Yeah, Dave, just to add on that, the user fee, the 7.125% was authorized by the board towards the mitigation and conservation fee. And then we did a Prop 218 on the user fee for 1.2%. And the 1.2% was to go towards the water supply charge.
automatically, yeah. And so that one was actually passed under Prop 218 way back in time, but it was for the ASR program. So Suresh is right. We've got this little 1.2% that flows into this user fee line item and then offsets the loan payment for ASR program.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? All right, yeah, Susan.
I just have a question about the recycled water. I know you're buying it at wholesale, you're selling it at wholesale to CalAm, then CalAm is selling it at retail to the ratepayers. How would that be affected after acquisition? I mean, will that considerably be a different way you analyze that, or will that still be a retail level sale? I'm just curious about how that would all work once the acquisition happens.
That's a great question. So we don't add any labor or overhead. So it's a direct pass-through. Monterey One Water does in fact add quite a bit of an administrative penalty on top. So they're covering their labor and overhead charges. We pay for that then Cal-Am pays for that. So it's really just a cost-based pass-through. There's no additional Cal-Am profit on purchased water. So they're limited to, the way it works is every budget season, so coming right up in the next month, we'll have a specific budget just for Pure Water Monterey. And it'll show labor, chemicals, energy, debt service, capital replacement.
Okay.
And so those real costs plus M1 Water's administrative costs, and that becomes the cost of water for that year. And then if it turns out at the end of the year, they had under budgeted because inflation hit chemicals harder, there'll be a true up in the next budget year. But we set the price of water just once, and then that's what is paid for the next fiscal year, so July through June. But it is just a pure cost-based pass-through. And so what you'll see on your bill will be an MPWMD surcharge for Pure Water Monterey. And that's, or it's probably MPWMD purchased water surcharge. And that's a surcharge that Cal-Am has calculated, assuming 3,500 acre feet of water is both accepted from us and then delivered to its customers. And so they're also estimating, and if they're wrong by a little bit, then they'll make an adjustment, but it's supposed to be just pure cost pass-through, which is why they book it separately as just a surcharge, purchase water surcharge. So no profit, but under a public ownership, it's going to be pretty much the same thing. You won't see it as a surcharge any longer. It'll just be a cost of water supply. But again, it'll be cost-based.
Okay. And then I just had one other question that you are doing a extra water being stored as a reserve. What happens when you meet that reserve level?
Yeah.
Does something happen after that?
Yeah, so we're making a decision. The way things are working right now, in the winter months, we can really crank up the Pure Water project, and it's running at like 5 million gallons per day, which is its design capacity. Mm-hmm. During the summer months, we drop that down to somewhere just over 4. And that's because the rest of the plant is all those old waters that go to the growers for irrigation. It's all going through the plant at the same time. So there's a lot of competition for water in the summer months. Marina Coast Water District is now taking some of the Pure Water water, and they'll start irrigating Bayonet and Black Horse this summer. So summer has a little more competition. So we work really hard in these off months. And what was the question, Susan? It was something about
just what happens once you reach that
so once you
reserve
hit
level?
it. Yeah, so once we hit the reserve level, we think there's still going to be extra water that could be produced. This is even before the expansion. And so we need to make, so Suresh and I kind of put our heads together and then look at the situation. We may want to build more reserves, but it comes at a cost. This is manufactured water, whereas the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Program is just, if it rains, you have water. It's a little cheaper water. But right now, between now and when Pure Water expansion comes online, there is a shortfall of firm supply. And so that shortfall, about 1,000 acre feet, maybe 1,200 acre feet, that has to be met by stored water. And, or this year, because of the rain, there's another water right that's kicked in called the Table 13 water right, but that'll reduce the pressure on that 1,200 to maybe say it'll end up being maybe 800 to 900 acre feet of shortfall that then comes from stored water. Mm-hmm. So we may make the decision to put more water over and above the operating reserve in the ground, just to have extra water for this 2-year period, waiting for Pure Water expansion to come online. So.
Okay, so there's a possibility for further storage beyond that. Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious. Thank you.
And Suresh, just so you know, I think we'll buy everything that we can buy in June. And then if we decide we don't want to hold it, then we'll just apply it against next year's July deliveries.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would work and that would yield a little bit of profit on the district side because the cost of the water.
Because the water price will change, yeah.
change.
Thank you.
Okay, on to 2C.
So Exhibit 2C is a simplified version of the same report we looked at on B. The only thing difference is on the revenue side, everything's trimmed off except for the water supply charge. So for 22 number, that's the audited numbers. For 23, that's the numbers through February 28th. So looking at the revenue itself, water supply charge and all of the expenses for the fund that cost to operate, that's what the bottom line is on the difference, either surplus or deficit. And as you can see, if it's just the water supply charge, we've been having deficit every year. I don't think there's a single year that we would have made it without the other proceeds from like the property tax fee, the user fee, or any of the other fees. So just the water supply charge itself is not enough to service the water supply charge fund.
And that's a perfect transition into the next discussion item, which is an update on the Monterey Peninsula taxpayers lawsuit. And the reason I say it's a good segue is if you look at the chart in 2C, all the way down in the, the right-hand corner, you see the negative 11.4 million. So in April of 2017, I think it was, our board adopted a policy that said we will pay down the Rabobank loan that then became the Mechanics Bank loan. Then we will look to repay ourselves borrowed monies for water supply purposes, and then we'll look to sunset the water supply charge. So that almost 0.5 million of ongoing accumulated deficit is what we would have wanted to keep repaying ourselves, repay the Mechanics Bank loan, replenish our reserves to ourselves, and then begin looking at the sunset of the water supply charge. The decision that you received shortly after the decision came out, so you've already had that via email, said no. The judge went out of her way to define what available meant, and she tended to say your first dollars in district, you have the discretionary choice to apply first to the water supply charge. So you should have sunset, or you should sunset from this point onward. Part of what Dave Laredo will discuss on the attachment that we gave you is there's grounds for a new trial because of failure to recognize the Constitutional Commerce Clause exemption, and there's failure to recognize that there were some defined priorities of the use of the user fee by the Public Utilities Commission that should have been considered first before, so kind of in conflict with the judge's description of available. But with that, on this topic, so we're on to item 3. We included in your packet the districts. Was this a motion, or what do we call this?
This is the brief.
The brief,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, that's right. We did a very short one-page notice to the judge that we were going to file, and then this is what we filed.
So there are very tight time periods. The Judge Panetta's judgment was entered on March 15th. The district has filed motions for a new trial and to vacate the judgment. That has been responded to. The argument that the district has made is threefold: that the user fee revenues are not available in the entirety to replace the water supply charge, that the contracts clause of the Constitution precludes an order that would completely retire the water supply charge, and that the Mechanics Bank is also an indispensable party and its interests are affected. So that is the motion that's going to be before Judge Panetta. There is a case management conference on April 28th. And we anticipate that we will be hearing from Judge Pineda what action, if any, the trial court will make on the motions. The trial court could choose to do nothing, in which case then the orders are deemed denied as of May 29th. So the judge would have to take some action before that. In fact, to hear the motion, that action could be to set a hearing on the matter, or to actually open a new trial. But we will know likely on April 28th what direction the court's going to go in on this matter. And if, in fact, the court does not act on the motions for new trial or vacate judgment, then the district board has already provided direction that the judgment should be appealed. And that's the path that's there. So we will know certainly before, no later than the end of May, as to whether or not this is going to continue in the trial court or not.
And so contrary to Rick Hoyer's press release, where he implored the district to do the right thing and not appeal, obviously we will appeal if the matter doesn't move forward with a new trial. So when we get to the next discussion item, bear in mind that's just expenditures to date. There will likely be more expenditures because of this matter through the 28th, and then whatever happens after that. Yeah, that's good, because I think there's some confusion over this year versus next year. So,
well, the water supply charge for up through June 30th of this year is already set in motion. The district had no continuing discretion. The discretion was exercised last year when the direction was sent to the county to collect that and place it on the tax roll. That was done. It's on the tax roll. Some people have paid their taxes in their entirety. Other people have not paid. One way or the other, the county is in a ministerial task, and that is to collect the monies on the tax roll and to rebate or remit those proceeds to the district as they're collected. We could not stop that at this point if we wanted. The county is independently collecting that. And there's nothing in the judgment at this point that interferes with that collection. So the next discretionary point will happen at the time the district sets its budget for 23-24 and provides direction to the county on collecting the tax roll for that period.
so this direction to the county goes in August and every year. So, like school districts that are collecting for bond issues and,
the district,
mosquito abatement
the
district
has a portion of the tax roll that's not affected by this whatsoever.
Exactly.
But the point being is that the district will be setting its budget based upon what it believes and understands its revenues would be available.
And so if we're in appeal, so this year, all of those collections that predated the decision. And that's why Suresh is still showing them in the current fiscal year as coming in. For next fiscal year, if we do not appeal, then we remove the charge.
It'll be up to the board of directors as to exercises its discretion as to, is this collectible or not? Does it choose to collect?
And so
have the legal authority to collect.
And if we're in appeal and it chooses to collect, then very likely our budgeting will be that the full amount comes in, but we'll probably sequester it in a separate account. So it's available for refunds if need be, if the appeal doesn't go through or doesn't prevail. So it's kind of like, if we're in appeal, then we still have the authority to collect. We probably will collect. But then if we ultimately lose on appeal, then we'll be prepared to do refunds.
And Dave's just offering his projection, his opinion as to what the board may do. The board ultimately has the discretion to provide direction on this.
Yep.
I would think you're in the midst of setting the budget for 23-24.
About a month away.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So your anticipation is then the water supply charge will remain in the budget?
Right. But there will be no expenditures set against it. So that, yeah, it won't have if 3.4 million comes in, there will be 3.4 million in a separate account just sitting there. Then if the board chooses to appeal and we prevail on appeal, or if we get a new trial and they direct that, oh, there is a portion of the water supply charge that should remain untouched and there's a portion that you have discretion, then we'll look at that one and modify. But we don't really know where it's going to be, other than if we have authority to collect, we will collect, but we won't expend because we may have to refund.
Right. So then the budget, quite likely, if it has at 3.4, will also have provisions for if it's uncollectible.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, if it's uncollectible, the hard part, of course, is you can't pick and choose what you pay on your tax bill. So when you could send a nice letter to the tax collector saying, I've paid everything except this fee, and they'll just proportionally say you're in default and put you on the default list. So
This is actually getting a little far
Yeah.
afield from the lawsuit.
yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions or anything? Fun stuff, though.
Yeah, let's get forward.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to 4, but we might as well get there. And so you had asked for expenditures, and this, by the way, this looks fairly typical. Someone asked for expenditures on the LAFCO proceedings. To date, that separate case that we have, and it looked very similar to this. It seems to be kind of the cost of the freight. Both of those cases are in a similar spot. We go to bench trial August 7th on the LAFCO case, so they're kind of on the same path. They both started at about the same time too. But 150,000 to protect a $3.4 million revenue stream, it doesn't seem that out of character for.
And the one thing that we should be aware is that if in fact the district does not prevail, then there will be an exposure to attorney's fees under the theory that MPTA is defending a public right and that exceeds its personal stake in the matter.
Do we have any idea?
Yeah, well, so we've done all that research, and unfortunately, they don't use the reporting form on their taxes to show revenues. And I think the bar is set pretty high. If your revenues exceed 50,000 a year, then you have to file that schedule with your tax form. And they're also not a 501c3; they're like a 501c2. So it's a little bit difficult. So they have, you can see their last tax return and 7,500 of revenues or what have you,
But we're not in the stage of the proceedings that they would yet put a claim in for their attorney's fees. That would be through and before the court.
So there's no way to funds the tax.
No, not easily. No, back in like Measure O and Measure J, when they were political, then you could see contributions from CalAm go into the account that then they produce the black and white mailers from, and then you can see the expenditure on the mailers. I mean, that's all the political stuff you can see where, CalAm funds directly, but yeah, you don't see it on just the annual.
We could discuss us looking at your financials. Let's not discuss that then.
Yeah. Technically, this discussion item is on legal costs to the district on MPTA.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Not hearing.
No, no, this is MPTA is the party that is litigating this. MPTA, if they prevail, will have a valid basis to make a claim for attorney's fees that were expended.
Whether they were paid for by
Even
the
if,
taxpayers or paid for by someone else who was
and
footing the bill.
even if the law firm that represented MPTA did this pro bono, they would still, meaning that they did not pay anything or did not receive anything for their legal services, the prevailing party is entitled to reasonable legal fees
Mhm.
in the matters of this type, if they prevail.
Any more questions on item 4? Okay. So on the Mechanics Bank loan, we did discuss it in the context of the mid-year budget. So the existing loan was 4 million minus, almost 50,000+ of issuing expenses, and then a set aside of a couple $100,000 for a debt reserve fund. And then of those proceeds, approximately half were used to immediately pay down other accounts that have been used for ASR, and then the other half was used for prospective expenditures on ASR. So we spent, 3.7 million on the ASR facilities. The outstanding balance is about 2.1 million, and we have a 10-year balloon payment due June 30th of this year. So at mid-year budget, we discussed that it makes most sense to likely pay it off in June, because the terms that we've been offered are a new loan with, whatever it costs to pay it off. Obviously, because the water supply charge is under contest, it can no longer be pledged separately as the sole source of security. So we would have to rewrite the installment purchase agreement, which secures the loan to include all the district revenues. Those attorney's fees would be higher. It'd be like originating a brand new loan. And so there's some costs involved. The original loan had a 30-year amortization with a 10-year balloon. This one would have a 25-year amortization with a 10-year balloon. So 25 years makes your principal payment a little higher each year. And then the interest rate they were offering is 6.5%. Suresh, does that sound right? Yeah.
Wow.
And the existing loan was what, 3.9%?
Correct.
Yeah. So just the arbitrage of interest rates makes more sense to pay off the loan than to go into a 6.5% loan. But the board hasn't made that decision formally yet. So as of right now, we still have an outstanding loan that was pledged with water supply charge as its security, which is one of the considerations in the application for a new trial. Contracts clause of the U.S. Constitution says you can't undermine other pledges that were done in to secure contracts. So that being said, I think we're going to pay it off. It's likely it'll get paid off. It'll be part of the budget discussions. We have a budget workshop in May, like May 25th or 23rd or something like that. See, I just stare at Suresh. He nods. Means I'm close.
May 27th.
Okay. May 27th. And so at that time, we will get board direction on whether to pay it off or not, and then would do so in June, likely. But that seems where we're headed. And, I think we also looked at what we're getting now. So, with interest rates rising, kills your business, or it doesn't help. it improves our investment returns because we ladder out a bunch of FDIC insured negotiable CDs, certificates of deposit, and we limit them to 250,000. So we've now managed to go from getting nothing on a 2-year CD to getting 4+%. And so we could actually invest in CDs and make more than it would cost to continue to pay the Rabobank loan or the Mechanics Bank loan, but not the 6.5%. So it's kind of like we're at that point. It's all the decisions have to get made, and so we'll just take that $2 million hit in June probably. You guys have anything to add on that one, Suresh?
No, you've said it all.
Yeah. That's it. Any questions on that, on the loan payment?
The budget process, are you starting to have worst case scenarios as part of the discussion?
Yeah, I don't know what would be a worst case. I mean, losing the water supply charge, we're going to address that one in the worst,
I can't hear.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I'm not hearing you guys.
Oh, sorry, Susan, we said, don't speak loud. Susan might hear us, so. No, I don't, it's just sometimes when two people get talking, it becomes inaudible, so we'll just try to be a little more.
Okay, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wasn't hearing the conversation.
Yeah. So expect that to be the case, that we pay off the loan, we'll have debt service savings during the year. We'll have taken, a $2.1 million hit to our reserves going into next year. And then on the 3.4 million of water supply charge, it'll show up as a revenue, but no expense. So that's that worst case. Other worst cases, I don't think we've got much exposure in the next fiscal year for any Measure J. Maybe a little bit of MPTA legal fees. That would be, that would fall into next year. But those aren't big enough numbers to.
You would have the loss of the water supply charge plus the potential legal fees as the downside for the next budget cycle.
And I think we'll budget the legal fees as a worst case, because that's just could be a couple $100,000. You guys have any other questions on the loan? Okay.
I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, so we wouldn't spend it on any litigation, any of our programs. There are some potential expensive things related to fish passage, which I don't think would happen for a couple of fiscal years. So we're just going to pretend like it's not available. It's not available for Measure J, not available for excess capital needs, just simply over there. Because if we've got legal authority to collect it and then ultimately prevail, it's better to have it sitting there because now we can release it, free it up. If we chose not to collect it until we prevailed, then we'd just be giving up, a year, maybe even 2 of revenue. But so it's better to collect it, not expend it, and then set up a refund process. If there is a refund that has to occur, it's going to happen here. We can't expect the tax collector to do refunds for a variety of reasons we don't need to get too into, but they're not really equipped very well, and B, they don't exactly know. I mean, we give them a big database so they know which parcel has what fee, but they run the risk of when you have property transfers, somebody paid it in this year and there's a new owner in the following year, they just see a parcel number, and you don't want to refund from one person to another, we can actually see the person and we know who paid it. And so it'll be one of those situations where you have to demonstrate proof of payment, show us your bill, then you get your refund. But yeah, we'll just sit on it, Marley. That's what we're going to find out. So all the division managers have their budget exercise in a few weeks, and we are in a position where we can, I guess I'll call it transition this a little bit. When we were doing a lot of projects, we did spend reserves. We have a very healthy reserve situation right now. So, and the user fee based on CalM's rate increases, and you know what those look like, Melody. We had 11.2% last year, and we're looking at roughly 28% over the next 3 years. 31%, okay. So the user fee will continue to grow based on the meter charge and the volumetric charge. It will be growing not quite at the pace we'd be losing the water supply charge, but over about a 3-year to 4-year period, depending on what increases they actually accrue, we should be almost the full 3.4 million grown out of the deficit that the water supply charge creates. We had wanted to maybe reduce the user fee on the bill as well, but we won't be able to do that very quickly if we wipe out the water supply charge. So, but again, we can grow out of it, use reserves for the 2 to 3 years while waiting to grow out of it. So, but there's going to be a budget impact. I can't tell you which 3 million of stuff is not going to get paid for. Yeah, we'll hold a bake sale. You'll see me with my little cardboard sign down at the mouth of the valley.
Exceeding your rate of
Not
revenue.
hearing anything.
Oh.
Just a little button at the bottom, and you just press and hold, and then your light, and then the light comes on. Yeah, there it is.
Saying, Susan, it's very refreshing to hear Dave talk about reducing the user fee, the goal of reducing the fees to the consumer when you constantly hear CalAm talking about increasing and exceeding their revenue, their rate of return. Big difference.
Moving along.
Moving along. Okay, so other items, number 6, the water supply project update. I wanted to let you know, if you haven't heard already, we did a pretty good job of announcing it, but the water purchase agreement for the expansion has been signed by all parties. And the bids were, I think, issued, our construction documents issued yesterday. And we're looking for an award. The award will be through Monterey One Water's board, July 31st. So then you would see mobilization and construction starting, probably sometime in August. And that's the time that we will then start looking at allocation of water from the project to the various cities, so that everyone can start imagining housing starts and job growth with water in hand. Of course, it's a 2-month build schedule, so it wouldn't come online until roughly 3rd quarter of 2025. So that's a period where, honestly, earlier when I said there's about a 1,200 acre foot per year shortfall, that shortfall is what gets made up by either Sand City desal, the Table 13 water rights, banked ASR water, or CalAm could always come to us and say, can you spot us some of the operating reserve or Pure Water Monterey? It right now is about 1,200 acre feet, and that's the operating reserve. And then the ASR is at about 2,400 acre feet. So, you know, all told about 3,600 acre feet of storage. So if the shortfall every year until there's a new supply from the expansion is only about 1,200, we can obviously cover the next 2 years during construction. But then we'd be slightly at risk with a reduced drought reserve and a reduced operating reserve.
What was
So-
the
ASR right now is about 2,400, 2,500 acre feet. We put about 1,100 acre feet in this year, and we started with 1,400 in storage. So if it hadn't rained this year, trying to make 2 additional years would be very, very tight. If it didn't rain the following year, because you get no Table 13 water right credit in dry years either. And the desal plant has a harder time running in very dry years because it's a brackish water plant and it needs natural rainfall in the sand dunes. So it's that, praying for rain is not a strategy, I've said more than once, but that's been kind of what was going to carry us during the construction period, which is why we were a little distressed about the delay that went into the Pure Water Monterey expansion process, because you can only use up what you have in the ground, and it's enough for 2 years. And so going 3 years, we wouldn't have made 3 years without overdrafting the Seaside Basin or some other. The choices would have been to violate the cease and desist order or to violate the court's physical solution on the adjudication. And the penalties are lower for violating the court's decision. So you'd end up overpumping the Seaside Basin, creating a deficit, rather than overpumping the river and creating likely fines and charges with the State Water Board. Either way, not a good place to be. So rain was good. So rain plus the combination of signing the water purchase agreement means now we still just have a 2-year window that we're worried about. And I think we have enough water that we don't have to worry. So.
same?
Yep. It's going to be interesting, Marley, because we agree with you that it's highly likely that our average rainfall stays the same or even goes up. But if it happens in greater short episodes, the way the river works is you want a little more constant rainfall. So we had a lot of rain in mid-December this last year, and it was enough to fill and spill the reservoir. But then stream flow wise, we measure stream flow for purposes of aquifer storage and recovery down at Highway 1. And so you have big episode, you fill the dam, it starts to spill. And for 3 days, actually it was about 7, there was enough flow that we could do ASR. But all that water is trying to soak into the ground. And so very quickly, the flows at Highway 1 went down to below the water right. And so it's not until you get several rainfalls on a periodic basis that fully saturates the river that now you've filled all the holes. And so what you really want is like a rain about every 8 days. And if you don't get that, if you just get dumped on for a week and then dry again for 3 weeks, ASR may not be as productive. And so we're worried about how it happens because we're pretty confident. And they say this is going to be a firm El Nino year coming up. That's usually helped us. It's the La Nina years that have hurt us. So, we're kind of looking at like, yeah, there'll be a lot of rain, but hopefully it happens more like it did this year where unexpectedly you get a rainfall that you didn't even plan. about every other week. So, yeah.
Marty, question.
It's not expected that those wells could be completed ahead of the expansion.
Yep. Yeah, and you're scratching at a sore point because the last general rate case, so Callum does 3-year general rate cases, and we raised several issues that you not only need future water supply, but you need to make what you have now work. And it's been known for quite some time that pump stations to move water uphill in the Carmel Valley were needed if most of your supply is now coming from the north. The pump stations didn't even get fully energized till after the January floods. Then they were tested. There were a number of leaks. So there was issues with how much water was available in the valley. So that was one constraint on ASR. Had those pump stations been tested in August to October, two things would have benefited. They would have been ready to go in January so that when certain wells got flooded during the heavy rains, you could push water up the hill and not worry about tank volumes and fire flows, safety, and so forth. That wasn't the case because the pump stations weren't there. So when upper Carmel Valley wells went down due to flooding, we had to back off ASR. So this is not even the number of wells on this end, it's the number of wells available in the valley. And there is a new Carmel Valley well that's been on the books. It was approved in 2019's rate case. It wasn't ready to go. And there were 2 well rehabilitations that were approved in the rate case, and they weren't ready to go. So the Carmel Valley constraints could have been solved if they just build things once they get approved, build them faster, right?
It's already in our rates, right?
They're coming into the rates. They can't really come into the rates until they're used and useful. Now, yeah. And so I noticed that, as an example, Cal-Am said that the new Carmel Valley pump station was used and useful and should have been in rates as of July 1. Well, it was complete, but it hadn't been tested because they couldn't get any water up to it to test until the Forest Lake pump station was used and useful, ready to go. That didn't happen until February. And so I'm not even sure if the Carmel Valley pump station did get into rates in July or if it had to wait until February to be proven out as useful. So there's little things like that that I don't really get caught up in 6-month differences. But in 2017, they knew that they needed redundant extraction capacity up here on the north side, which they then tied to the pure water expansion that then got held up for a year over the supplemental environmental impact report and then got held up for another year with the proceeding on the water purchase agreement. And what they should have done is taken the 2 wells that they need just for redundancy and throw them into the rate case in 2019. They'd already been built. They wouldn't have to be using ASR well number 3 to produce water. They would have had those 2 wells to produce water. We could have injected and we could have doubled our injection. So it's a series of little things that, and another final example is the intake well, a new intake well for the Sand City desal plant. It's been approved by the Coastal Commission for 3 years, still not yet built. So if they would just build things in a timely fashion, we could have maxed out. We could have gotten another 1,000 acre feet into ASR. So that's one of our current lines of reasoning is they've said they need certain projects, but they don't act quickly enough and they can benefit. You know, we just lost so much this winter that we could have had 4 projects that were already on the books and already planned. So in the last rate case, the judge said, work more closely with the district on your capital projects needed for water supply. And it didn't really happen in
Susan has a question.
3 years. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, Susan.
it's related to the CPUC. They've given them permission to do this and put it in the rates and build these things. And what kind of responsibility do they have to meeting those permissions from the CPUC? Is there any kind of regulatory oversight on that? Or does the CPUC even realize how bad it is? I mean, I'm sure you're probably letting them know. What kind of repercussions could
The
happen?
commission
to them?
allows expenditures, but does not mandate them. CalAM has an obligation to serve and serve adequately, but if CalAM does not meet its obligation, then the enforcement mechanism is through a complaint. We did file a complaint. The commission chose not to hear that. The commission is not a very effective regulatory body in terms of plumbing. They are an effective regulatory body with respect to rates and charges.
Okay,
And
thank you.
Well, and what happened in the late 60s, shortly after the original acquisition, in the early 70s, service was so spotty that, it was a little bit, so there were two water companies that were combined. One was the Monterey County Water Company, which was really part of American Water and Telephone. The other was the East Side Water Company, which was Seaside. And so the joke was there were certain times of the year where the pipes just ran out of water before they got to Seaside. And the commission came in, and basically the pipeline that goes up over the hill through Tehama and Montera was a byproduct of the commission saying, your system's not reliable enough, you're underperforming, build some redundancy so you can not have these problems. And if you don't build it, we will not allow you to get your rate of return for ratepayers.
They also imposed a moratorium on new connections as a
Yeah.
means to enforce, but that,
It takes a lot to get to that point.
And that's not really a penalty on the utility. It's a penalty on everyone who needs and wants access to water.
Yeah, penalty on builders and homeowners.
Just like we have a moratorium now for the lack of water rate.
But it takes a huge series of missteps or underperformance for the commission to really compel one of its utilities to do that kind of thing. So we just, we raise the issues, and I think in this rate case, one of the things we've asked for is just follow up on completion. If you approve something and it's not built 3 years later, remind the utility that they need to be doing it. So there's a series of those that we've asked about. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just think it's really almost kind of a joke in a way to say you're going to do something and then never follow through and have an impact on the water system and the ratepayers as a result. Thank you.
Do you think there's any will on CalAM's part to remedy all these various, ASR and
I think that calls for speculation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they recognize it and they put it into the capital plans, but I don't think they always see it's not the urgent, it's not intentional. Well, that calls for speculation.
Dave, don't go there.
I don't, I think there's limited bandwidth and, there's different things, but they've had the right requests. They know they need redundant well capacity in the valley. They know they need redundant well capacity up here on the north end of the thing. But maybe they're limited by how many projects they can do at one time.
Marley, ask your question.
This is a question. Several hundred people a week, maybe 1,000 a week, who go out to the middle of the bridge over the Carmel River in Garland Park and look at the sign that says Monterey Peninsula Water Management Gauge. But is it running? Is it working?
So, on that bridge, there's a little glass box. I haven't gone to check and I haven't heard from my staff, but usually it is running. So, I mean, that gauge is an old workhorse. But if you see this, stop, send me an email and we'll get somebody to go get out there. One of the first things I did when I got here 12 years ago is I went on a hike in Garland Park and that box was just a disaster. And I said, you guys, clean this thing up, make it visible, put a sign in there and tell people what it is. Do something because it's sitting right there at the bridge and it's kind of cool. It's really old school, with the little, well, it at least lets you know we're there. But yeah, I don't want to be there if we're not working. So I'll have somebody look.
Next item.
Yeah, anything else? This is also called the gossip topic. So I want to make sure if you've got any questions about what's going on water supply wise, you get them out now. All right. Actually, I did want to tell you because you're here and we will be going to the cities shortly. So we're going to maintain an allocation process, which means each city is going to have a chunk of the new water from Pure Water Monterey expansion. And we're going to begin that process probably simultaneous with the start of construction. So we'll have a 2-year window to work it out. So we have what's called a technical advisory committee, which is all of the typically city planners, but for smaller cities, they've assigned their city managers. And then we have a policy advisory committee, and that's typically mayors or a city council member. This process is going to involve water being allocated to each of the jurisdictions based on their commercial water needs going forward through the AMBAG growth forecast, through their residential water needs, through the population forecast in AMBAG, and then an adjustment for the RENA housing numbers, because while AMBAG says that all of their planning includes RENA, when they distributed population to each city, it wasn't consistent with the housing numbers to each city. So while the total RENA housing needs are in the county on a broad basis, they're not properly allocated to Monterey and Seaside, we've noticed. It's not that big a deal. It's like 4.8 acre feet per year difference. But we're going to look at those differences. And so based on RENA housing numbers, one city may get a little bump versus another city. But the goal is to get every city an allocation. We're going to treat Army, Navy, Coast Guard, and the airport as separate jurisdictions. But we will make an allocation based on what we perceive to be a 10 to 15 year need, while keeping in mind potential supply issues, meaning if we're not confident that there's enough water in the ground from ASR to operate year in and year out at 1,300 acre feet, then we'll make some adjustments. We have to recognize that CalAm wants to recharge the Seaside groundwater basin for 25 years. So we're going to look at withholding certain supplies, the needs for that 10 to 15 year period. The difference will be water that we're not going to allocate. And so we're going to try to allocate some water and then see who grows. Right now, Monterey says we're committed to building housing. And Carmel says 329 new housing units. How can you do that to us? We protest. And Monterey's numbers like 3,600 new units, 10 times as many. So what'll happen is over the course of, let's say, the first decade, you'll see who's really growing and who's not, who's building housing and who's not, and so forth. But that process is likely to be maybe challenged by folks who say, you're not giving me enough. Carmel's pass, and I live in Carmel, but their pass has been, you're shortchanging us. And then if we gave them more, they wouldn't know what to do with it because they don't want to build anything. It's that kind of, give it to me, but I'm not going to use it. But from, yeah. Oh, yeah. And, well, yeah, I think they should. There's a couple of places they can put a lot of units, but the concept of upzoning and so forth.
This is all
Yeah.
putting the matter on the future agenda to discuss.
But it's water supply, so you need to know that this process is starting. And as a housing rep, you're going to want to hear, the Tyler Williamsons are going to want to hear, but we'll have a plan in place. We've got to do some CEQA discussions. But the idea is to also then be in a position where our board can determine whether they will allocate water in advance of completion of the project, perhaps based on the completion of the project. So in other words, we know we don't have water until third quarter of 2025, but if you come in with a big project that's definitely not going to come online until 2026, then our board's going to have to make a decision where they want to allow the cities to do water release forms against a future in-service date. So all that kind of stuff will be happening. That's part of the allocation process. But I'd like us to be at a position maybe a year into the project where we're approving building permits or approving water permits for projects that won't come online until after the new supply. So, but then we have to enlist the state to start looking at lifting the CDO. We need the business interests to hold CalAm accountable, because what we don't want to see is CalAm say, yeah, pure water expansion's some water, but it's not enough water to lift the CDO. We still need desal. If the story is going to be we still need desal, you don't want to hold the community hostage if in fact you could lift the CDO based on just the expansion. And so that's a conversation that needs to happen. We believe you can lift the CDO based on the expansion. And if you still want to have desal, then come up with another argument, but don't use it to keep the CDO in place and the moratorium in place just to get a desal plant approved somehow faster. Because again, we're going to have a lot of supply and demand discussion. It's a phase of a proceeding that's currently open at the PUC. There's just been no action on that phase of that proceeding in months. But if we build it, the water's there. There's more water than CalAm will know what to do with immediately, because demand doesn't flip overnight. And so we'll be seeing water go into the ground, which will increase all the reserves, which should make it, 2 to 3 years in, you've got so much water stored, so much water coming off, that we should be able to build everything we want to build. And now you have the luxury of being able to go 5 years and look backwards, say, are we growing faster than we thought we would, or growing slower than we thought we would? And as long as you can keep looking and say, well, I foresee that we're moving faster and we're 10 years away from needing another supply, as long as you're always 10 years ahead of it, that's a good thing. So we think we're going to be, as I've said repeatedly, 30 years ahead with pure water expansion. But if you don't believe 30 and you think it's 20 or 10, we need to get the community looking at it as a way to lift the CDO and the moratorium so we can actually build something. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
Question.
Yeah.
So it's in CalAm's interest not to lift it. So why would they lift it? And no one can force them to do anything, we've discovered. So
The state could, they've made certain promises that another party, just like a petitioner for many things at the state, to revisit an order or what have you, another petitioner can do it, even though the cease and desist order is written saying CalAm has to initiate it. That's what the CDO says, but the water code allows others to intervene. So we would hope that they join with us, and it's like a 3-party effort to do the same thing, which is us, CalAm, and the State Water Board, and then begin that process so that you don't have to wait a year after you flip the switch. You wait a day after you flip the switch, or wait a month after you flip the switch. it's a two-part process. The cease and desist order has to be lifted first. That's going to be arduous. But then lifting the moratorium is an advice letter with the Public Utilities Commission. And so if the cease and desist order is lifted, then within 60 days, say 90 days if it went slower, but the moratorium could be lifted. So it's that first step that's going to take, a lot of discussion, and it's either with CalAm or without CalAm, unless there's some unexpected, unplanned issue surrounding, other water supplies that suddenly went away or other demands that suddenly materialized. But based on what we know now, that's where we're at. Last item is any other items for a future agenda? Hearing none, we'll invent a bunch. But because we meet roughly quarterly, feel free to send any ideas you have in for a future agenda, and we'll get them on there. And with that, I guess we are adjourned. And so now you can ask any other questions you might have.